Morning. What we're going to do this morning is take a look at marking out wood, metal and plastic. Now we use slightly different tools and processes to mark out the three different materials. So we're going to look at metal first, and I've got a piece of mild steel bar which we use in a DT classroom, and because a pencil or a pen will soon rub off on the metal if I leave it like this. So what I'm going to do is coat it with some dye, and the dye is this, okay, or layout ink as it's known by some people. Okay, I'll pop it in there. And very quickly, I'm going to dye the whole area blue, including the workbench. So when you're doing it, some newspaper underneath. That's enough. I'm going to let that dry now, and while I'm doing that, I'm going to go through some of the tools that we use. For metalwork marking out, we use this tool, and that's called an engineer's square. It's made of metal. Now, the equivalent one for woodworking is a tri-square. Tri-square for woodwork, an engineer's square for metalwork. What's the difference? Well, the woodworking one has a brass face on here, and that's quite soft, and we don't really want to damage that against metalwork or steels of any kind. So that we just keep aside for our woodwork projects, and for our metalwork ones we use the engineer's square. For marking out, we use an engineer's ruler, and on the end that is 0. So ordinary rulers, if I find one here, don't start from 0. So on the end there's a little gap. So if I wanted to measure something from the tabletop up, I couldn't, because of that little bit on the end there would prevent me from doing it. So with an engineer's ruler, I can place it flat on, mark off, and mark off if I need to. So that's an engineer's ruler, engineer's square. Now the other tools I'm going to show you this morning are a centre punch, and centre punch, I'm going to make a little divot with a hammer later so that I've got somewhere I can drill onto. I'm going to show you the difference on the pillar drill with or without that little divot. This is a scriber. So a scriber is much more pointy than a centre punch. So the centre punch is going to give me that little divot. The scriber is going to mark through or scratch a line through that layout ink that I've just put on, and that will be my line on the mild steel bar that I've got in front of me. Now the other tool I need is my persuading tool, or a ball peen hammer. This is my hammer. Okay, so it's now touch dry, and any chemicals in it have now evaporated. So I can now use my I've made that mistake, haven't I? It's an engineer's square, and I can place my engineer's square on the edge and then make sure there are no gaps. Okay, there are no gaps. I don't want to see people using it like that. I want it shut. Have the electricity back on, please. Thank you. Right, and it goes on like that. And that gives me a perfect 90-degree line. And all I have to do, pop it on, and it scratches through the layout ink. I don't know if you can see that in the camera, my line across there. And then I can measure off how much metal I want. In this case I'm going to do 50 millimeters from my line, and I can use the end of the ruler, engineer's square back on, and mark off. If I want to drill a hole in the middle of that square, all I have to do is join up the diagonals. Right, so it gives me a little X in the middle of that square. and I want to drill a hole there. So the tool that I introduced you to before is a center punch, and I very carefully pop it onto the line, okay, and then one tap, and that gives me a little divot or a dent where my drill will go, and it won't slide off. It will stay in that little divot if I'm careful. All right. If I want to mark out a circle, I can use a tool called a pair of dividers. It's like a compass, but it's a pair of dividers in metalwork. Pop one on there into the divot, and then I can measure off or mark out my circle. It will give me a nice perfect circle like that, and that's ready to be drilled out, and I'll go through that a bit later with you on the pillar drill. Okay, so that's metalwork basically. Okay, the engineer square, the center punch, the scriber, the layout ink, okay, and then wiping the grease off in the beginning. So I did that before we came on there. Used my paper towel, I took all the grease off. All right, so that's it. It's fine. Now we're going to move on to a different material, wood. So to show you what happens to plastic, I've got some hips here. This is high impact polystyrene. There's a little plastic cover on it, which I'll peel off later. I could try and mark out on that plastic cover, but if I press too hard, I risk damaging the plastic underneath. I don't want to do that. But to show you why I'm going to put masking tape on top of it first, I need to take you over to the scroll saw. Okay, this is my hips. What I want to do is just cut a line to show you some of the problems that occur with trying to cut plastic. Right, so what's happened is I've done a simple cut into my plastic, but because the saw gets hot and the plastic comes up, the little bits of plastic that I've cut, the sawdust if you wish, of the plastic come up, and they remelt the plastic. So once your saw blade passes through, it welds itself back together behind it. So that there is exactly what I don't want to happen. So I've done my cut. You can see my cut just there, just a little bit, but it's gone through the plastic, but it's welded itself back together again. And I don't want that. So what I'm going to do is tape over the area that I want to mark out. So coming back to plastic, and I've done my line with my tri-square, so I've got two 90-degree lines, very nice. I want to make a parallel line to that edge. I can't use the marking gauge, the traditional one, because the spikes will go through, or could go through the masking tape and damage my plastic, and I don't want that. So what I've done is I've taken out one of the spikes and replaced it with a tip from a ballpoint pen, and you can get these in shops, but I just took a pen apart and cut it down to the size that I wanted, and that works perfectly well. I adjust it in the same way, so and then to just demonstrate the way it works, you use it in exactly the same manner, face on the edge, and then very gently just scroll across, and you'll end up with a nice perfect parallel line. All right, and that's how to mark out plastic. We've done wood, and we've also now done metal. Okay, and thank you very much for watching.